Awesome. Hi, my name is Nathaniel Batsie, and I'd like to know your story. And thank you for coming today.
My name is Glenn Rasmussen. I am currently 81 years old, and I entered the Army in August of 1962, not because I was feeling particularly patriotic. It was more a case of I don't have any skills, I don't have any prospects for employment other than McDonald's, and that was $2 an hour at the time. So, to avoid the draft, I enlisted for 3 years. I wasn't what you would call, I was patriotic, but in a quiet way. I didn't find the people that were God and country. I couldn't do that. I took my basic training at Fort Knox. I was after all the intake stuff, the tests and everything, I was told invited to go to OCS, and I turned that down.
Okay.
I had relatives, my dad, everybody else is never be an officer.
Yeah. Okay. How was your AIT?
My AIT was learning how to be a ordnance supply clerk. It was really boring. I had more fun in basic training. But I was sent to Germany. I was the only person in my class that volunteered to go to Korea, and I was the only one that went to Germany. Everybody else went to Korea.
Yeah.
So when I got to Korea, the unit I was with didn't need an ordnance supply clerk. They needed a generator operator. So I worked as a generator operator.
Yeah.
On a Nike site.
Okay. So did you go to war and how was it?
What? Say again?
Okay. So did you go to war and how was it?
Did I go to war?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It was a rather strange, slow event because I was TDY during the summer of 1965 at a base in a National Guard base in Virginia. And I was called to the orderly room and told that I had to go back to Fort Eustis. Our battalion had been alerted. And the first thing out of my mouth is, we're going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Vietnam was in the military. Vietnam was not an unknown thing. You would get the Army Times would have updates on what was going on in Vietnam with the special forces and things, and everybody knew what was going to happen. When we got to we had to load a whole communications battalion up on train. The trucks and everything were all loaded on flatbeds, and we had to do that all by hand. And all our gear had to be packed up in Connex containers to go over. And we flew from Dulles Airport to San Francisco International, and they then bussed us to Oakland Army Terminal, where we joined the transportation unit who was already there, and we all embarked the next day on a troop ship for Vietnam. It's a 30-day journey. We made one stop in Guam. They provided us with an unlimited supply of beer and one jukebox. That led to some disagreements over what music was going to be played.
Mm.
And they had one person with an empty M14 as a guard. And a fight broke out. And our battalion commander told the guard to get in there and break that fight up. And and he said, with all due respect, sir, let's just wait until they get tired and we can deal with it. Because he knew there was no way he was going to ever deal with those. So they, everybody got back on the ship, and we got to Vietnam, and we were anchored off of Vung Tau. It's the port city in central Vietnam. And because we arrived so early in the day, they weren't ready for us. We were supposed to be there the next day. So they took down all the bunks, and we had to sleep on the floors. And while they were doing this, they were throwing concussion grenades randomly over the side to discourage sappers from coming out and mining it.
Yeah.
And inside, it was just awful. Every time one of those go off, it was just reverberated throughout the ship, no matter where it was dropped. I don't know if I got any sleep. I remember that, I got up and they herded us all out. We got on landing craft, went in, landed, and then they flew us to Benoit Air Base, and from there we were trucked to the location of what later became Long Binh, which was the major command center. But when we got there, it was a hill scraped clean, huge stack of barbed wire, and they told us to pitch tents. And we got there, we had our sidearms, had no ammunition, none whatsoever. And that night, we're watching a firefight across the, about five kilometers away. And you could see different color tracers going back. We didn't know who were who, but it was, everybody's going, just hanging out here. Hope they don't know we're here. And over the next 2 days, we had somewhat of a compound. We got squad tents up, things like that, and got a perimeter put in. But we still didn't get ammunition, and I had to set up the 50 caliber. And I say, I don't even get to test fire right there. No, you don't get to test fire. We still don't have any ammunition. So, being the one in the company that always asked the wrong questions at the right time, I ended up having to, when the ship with all our vehicles came in, I was sent down to guard it. A single 45 and one clip of 7 rounds, not to be inserted into the 45 unless something happened. And so I was supposed to guard this ship all night long. And one of the crewmen on the ship, said, "What have they got you doing?" I said, I'm guarding this ship. And he said, "You mean the guys with the guns down at both ends of the pier aren't enough?" I said, "Hey, I don't know." He said, "Would you like a drink?" And I said, "I sure would." And we proceeded to sit there and talk for probably 3-4 hours, and consumed about half a bottle of Jim Beam. Not drinking hard, but just, little, and some water with it. So, the next day, they came, and I had to wait all day while they unloaded that thing until I could get a vehicle back to Benoit, which was about 20 miles away. Needless to say, I wasn't real happy. But it wasn't shortly after that, all the photographers and the lab crew, we got moved down to Tonsanut Air Base. And that became our new home. That was a battalion headquarters for the 69th Signal Battalion. And it was an old and well thought of unit, unless you were in it. The first job I did down there was I was awakened one morning in December and went down and covered the Metropole Hotel bombing. Now they set up 250 pounds of plastic explosive right across the street from it. But there was almost no one there because everybody had gotten up and gone to work. So the casualties, there were civilian casualties, but no one was killed. And it wasn't, it did a lot of damage. But, that was one of those where, boy, this is a strange place. Because even then, there was no sense of urgency. It was kind of like, oh, this happened. Okay, let's go on with what's life. And we got to, then I got sent up to Ankei. I was part of a detachment that was with the 7th, or the 1st Cav. We were attached to the 13th Signal Battalion there, but we operated on our own. And the first operation I went out on was after, it was after the Battle of Idrang Valley in November of 65. And the unit we were going out with had been decimated. They had 75% casualties over a two-day battle. And so almost everybody they had was new. So I went out on the first training mission, Operation Clean Sweep. And I found that I had I liked the feeling I got going into a hot LZ. Everything slowed down in time. You know, it's like I had plenty of time to see everything. And I felt calm. Looking at it when we went in, we landed, I did what they told me to do, and everything was fine. We took some incoming fire, but not serious. And I got busy I was busy taking pictures. And it was a good training mission because they were able to show folks what a punji steak looks like even when it's hidden. And it was a 4-day mission. We went back in and we were successful. Next mission I went out was Operation Masher. And we were going into an area where the Vietnamese used North Vietnamese paper money. That's how long it had been under control. And it was one of those where we rode in a truck for a long way, then we got out and we walked for a long way, and nothing happened. And then the next morning, it was like the world fell apart. You know, they loaded us onto a group of choppers, and we went into a seriously hot LZ. And we found ourselves out in the middle of a rice paddy that was flooded. And next thing I knew, my camera was underwater. And I said, oh, well, so much for pictures. I still had the pictures that I had taken as we were, for the day before and when we started. But I don't remember, time just became irrelevant. We were out in that rice paddy for a long time. Then they fought their way into the villages. And we were in one village and we were coming up on a wide open rice paddy. And was doing something I never do again, is be close to antennas. Because I was with found myself with the battalion commander. And he was a big photography nut, so I had talked to him before. And he, all of a sudden there was this guy that appeared out of nowhere off to the side. And somebody else grabbed him. And then, as I was looking out, I heard gunfire, and I saw 3 guys just drop. And it was kind of like one of those, that's strange. It's not what I had visualized it would be. You just fell down. And the battalion commander said, he says, Rasmussen, grab that guy and don't let go of him and take him to S2 as soon as you can. I used him as a human shield. I had him by the neck, back of the neck, and I could feel this part of his neck. And used them from where I thought the most fire was coming from. I got to a cane break, and the mortar platoon was there, and the sergeant was going, "Yeah, let me take care of that guy for you." I said, "No, the CO told me to get him to S2. I said, "He's mine." So I turned him over, and CO was wounded at that time. And we choppered out because my motion picture photographer, he had used all his film, and my camera didn't work, so. But that was that was the first time I ever saw anyone die. And it wasn't horrific, it was just sad. There was no heroics about it. Well, I went on to I would go out with units on missions, and if I hadn't been out with a particular unit before, I was always getting the stink eye from a lot of them, photographers that just come in, take pictures, and then fly out. Well, we humped up and down those hills for like a week, doing operational things, and they flew in a PSYOPs team of medical people, and we went into a mountain yard village, and they did a medical checkup. And I got pictures of them giving a kid a shot in the butt, and they actually turned a VC cadre over to him, and he was questioned vigorously. So it was a time where the rules were, it was how you were feeling at the moment. And I can say that the whole 2 years I was there, I don't know if I ever actually killed anyone, but there were quite a number of times I tried. I was going to save my ass. And when I got there, I found myself, I didn't trust the Vietnamese, but the longer I stayed there and started interacting with them, they were just people that got stuck right in the middle of a bunch of crap. And they wanted to be, they would take advantage of the Americans. They'd take advantage of anybody that was, not shooting. But I found them to be admired. Some of them were very, very nationalistic. And I didn't know it until later, but Kirk's neighbor across the street had been a Vietnamese major in the Marines, and he had spent 10 years in prison after the Vietnamese took over. But he had a surprisingly great outlook on life. They can kill me. So it was a good thing. And I finally got, well, before that, my last true great picture was when BC attacked the base camp for the 7th Cav at On K. And they called it the attack on the fairway, or the golf course, because that's where all the pilots play golf. But it was one of those where I could hear what was going on, but it all sounded far away, and so I wasn't particularly interested in what was going on. I was trying to sleep, and at one point I just got off my cot and laid down on the floor of the hooch. And then there was like a half a dozen rounds went through the top of the tent, that pop, 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 pop. Oh shit. So I got up and with 2 other guys that had stayed there, and we walked down to the section where we have our photo section. And I pulled out a big honking tripod and a 4x5 view camera, loaded a sheet of film, stuck it in there, and took a 15-minute exposure. And when I got it, and I went in and I processed it. Oh, this is cool, and so I made one print, an 11 by 14 print of it, and I got back to the next morning. I showed it to my chief, it's our lieutenant, and he says, "Oh wow, that's great," and he said, "When did you shoot? Why weren't you in a bunker?" I said, "Sir, I'm not that stupid." And by noon, he calls me and goes, he gets a hold of me and he said, "What'd you do with that picture and negative?" I said, "I left them on your desk. They're gone." And I said, "Well, I didn't take them. I got no place to put them." And he said, "What do you think happened?" And I said, "I think somebody up in headquarters found out that I took the picture, and somebody in intelligence has got it right now. But it's never been published that I know of, because I'd be able to spot it. That's a one of a kind." And then I went back to Saigon, because I was now the senior still photographer in the platoon, and I had to take on responsibilities. I don't like responsibilities. It was not something I enjoyed at all. Now, when I was sent back to Saigon, I had to. The big thing was trying to get the newbies to understand that there was no heroics involved in it at all. You're out there and there are people who are trying to kill you, and they're real good at it. So, keep your ass down and pay attention to what's going on, and you will learn to survive. Now, there were incidents after I went back to Saigon that just kind of, what? There was an attack on Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and we were told to go out and hold the line in a certain sector. Well, the only people that that had ammunition when we went out there were the photographers. We never turned in our weapons. We just kept the ammunition. And when we got out there, got the duty officer is in charge. And I walked there and he said, "Excuse me, Lieutenant, did we bring any ammunition with us?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, we're out here supposed to be defending the air base. What are we going to do? Hit them with the butts of our rifles?" And he went, "Oh, yeah, okay." And I was, when we got back, it was the next day that we said, "That's not doing that again." Told the company commander that, we're not, for the photographers, we're not going to go out there like that, be the only armed individuals. And they said, "Oh, that'll be changed in the SOP." And the only other thing I really enjoyed doing, it was just before Tet in '67. The Vietnamese were getting all ready for it, and downtown they sold these firecrackers that were about this tall and about that big around. They didn't have a whole lot of powder in them, but they looked good. And they had a fuse on them that looked like clothesline. And one of the guys brought one back from downtown, and we were going back from our apartment back onto base because we had to. And I said, "Here, give me that." I took the firecracker and I stuck it in the drainage ditch across from the orderly room where the duty officer is sitting there reading, and lit the fuse, and we all ran in to our barracks, which was just around the corner. And we were just into the door when it went off. Sounded just like a mortar bomb coming in. It did. And seconds later, in came the duty officer. "I want to know who's responsible for that." And everybody's going, "For what?" "That explosion." "What was that? That was, and he says, "I'm going to walk out of here and I'm going to come back in 5 minutes, and I want to see all the contraband on the floor, or we're going to do a shakedown inspection." He walks out the front door. All the contraband goes out the back door and hidden under sandbags. And when he comes back in, everybody has their wall lockers and foot lockers open, standing at attention. He was unhappy. And when the next morning when we went out there, it was just marvelous, because there were all these $50 sized pieces of cardboard that were spread over about 30 yards. It was beautiful. But they did make us make our barracks clean it up. That's okay. And when I came back, I got back to Oakland Army Terminal, and it was one of those things. I was with a whole bunch of guys from the 82nd Airborne and a whole bunch of combat engineers. And a second lieutenant comes out, and we're all in bleachers. And he starts, "You men will do that." From back in the back, "Up yours, sir." Who said that? Nobody said anything. And he finally went to someplace, and finally somebody's sitting down close, and he says, the guy goes, "Sir, do you like a broken leg?" And he says, "What?" He said, "Just tell us what we got to do and let us do it. We don't need a pep talk. You aren't gonna, there's guys that are going back here, are staying here in service, and there are guys who are getting out. The guys that want to get out as soon as they can." This is like 10 in the morning. We didn't get out of there until midnight. And when they're going, said, "Well, where's all your issue?" I said, "I served it all in Vietnam." He's looking at me. "How did you do that?" Supply sergeant said was cool about it. And, but I got out. It wasn't, I got out, and I didn't immediately interact with the world because I had to take care of my younger siblings because my parents are going to Hawaii. So when my parents got back, I went out and I got a job about 6 weeks after I got out. And I got a job in a photo studio as a, what they call, a photographer assistant. That's a questionable term. I did all the dirty work, but I learned. And after about, I guess it was about 6 months, they put me on camera. And that was, I felt like I had done a pretty good job. Out in the real world, I found that it was better for me to take on the role of the war lover just to stop the people who were, got to be anti-war. This is all, I just, how do you feel about the war? And I said, I loved it. I said, nothing like going into a hot LZ, blood's pumping, you're going to get to kill. No, but I did things like that as a defensive mechanism. And largely it worked. Because, I had been in Vietnam. I didn't want to talk about it at that time. And as it happened, almost, well, with the exception of one of our Japanese photographer at the studio. All the other photographers were World War II veterans. So they didn't ask me about any of that. So I found myself getting along most of the time, but I had real anger issues. I had a short fuse, but I learned to be passive aggressive about it, which I think scared people more than anything else because I was never big. But as I gotten older, I found out that I do have a scary face. I don't know what it looks like, but I know that it really affects other people when I do it. And it's the kind of thing where I go, huh? This is, when something, I'm standing in front of somebody and my voice is not going up. It's getting a real hard edge to it. And I get, and there is something that happens to my eyes, and they just step back. And I've been told after the fact that my demeanor is too aggressive. So I've worked on that. Now it's taken me a whole lifetime to get to the point where I am, and now I'm pretty happy. It's there's rough spots in it, but I get along with my family, my sisters and my brother. We get together every year or two and hang out. And even when my mom died, my wife was just aghast at how easy we dealt with her estate. We took all of her antiques and everything. We just put them out on the floor, and we drew numbers out of a hat. And each drawing, the person who had the number one got to choose what they wanted. And we had no arguments whatsoever. And my wife was just, how do you do that? I said, I don't know. It's just the way we do things. And then I realized her family does not live like that. Somebody dies, it's like the ravens and the crows come in to pick the body. So is there anything else you would?
Yeah, I have one more question. It's like, how was it, would you have any advice for someone that wants to join the military now?
I would say joining the military now is questionable, because they're selling a product that doesn't exist. And the one thing everybody going into the military needs to understand is that you are a completely replaceable item. You have no value other than your body and what you're trained to do. And once you're done, once you can't do that anymore, you are thrown to the side. And it's only recently, in the last maybe 15 years, that the VA has started responding in a proper way. When I started going to the VA, I went to the VA the first time in 1969, and I was having real anger issues. Don't worry about that. It's all in your head. You'll get over it. Yeah, it was all in my head, and it just stayed there. So then the next time I went was after I retired. I was at home. I had nothing to do. And all that stuff that I had buried all came percolating up to the top. And I woke up one morning and I got to go over to the VA. I wasn't intent on hurting myself, but I sure wouldn't have minded hurting somebody else. It was that kind of I drove over there, and they referred me to the PTSD department, and I went through the therapy. The first therapist I had was interesting. She was a no bones about it. She would go when I'd say something. She'd go, "All politicians are dishonest." Yeah. It seems like that to me. But I went through CBT training with her, and that helped a lot. But I've been in therapy since then, and I've learned some things, and one of the things I've learned is not to use the word hate. That hate is a useless emotion. It's much easier to dislike something. It doesn't weigh on your conscience. It doesn't drag you down. So it's I'm trying to get through to a few of the guys in the group, and maybe it's getting through. Okay, would you like to see the pictures?
Okay.
Okay, this is the motor pool. High class stuff. you got lounge chairs. And this is some of the training that goes on. That is the ice house in Saigon, one of the ice houses in Saigon. Never put the ice in your mouth. See, this is the kind of stuff they sell around Tet. And that's where most of the GIs go, bars. See, they don't throw anything away. They're repairing engine blocks there. And this is the Metropole Hotel after the bombing. And that's what it looks like out the door of a helicopter with no door. This is the second wave coming in. It's just as they're about to land. Now, they had received fire from that direction, and they threw a grenade in there, and everybody was looking to see the big chunk of skull blown out of the VC's head. He was still alive. And that's just, you spend a lot of time walking. And there's, just people doing their jobs. Checking out the underwear. People do, it's just that is me when I was young. And this is when we were leaving on for Operation Masher. They were setting up a base camp. And of course, the obligatory, got to shoot some artillery. And that's setting up the mess tent. This was the public information officer. This guy went on to found Soldier of Fortune magazine, Bob Poos. But, there again, you've got guys, helicopters leaving, helicopters coming in, and these are the scary places, because you don't know what's over there. Just huge open areas. And at this point in the war, Vietnam was actually pretty beautiful. It was nice and green. I actually had a Vietnamese person that says it's a saying from the North Vietnamese to continue the struggle. There's questioning people, controlling people, and sometimes even feeding them. Now, this was the door gunner took a round through his arm. He was being replaced. And when you got a break, you dig stuff out of your cleats. So you had to fly as a door gunner to get pictures of the aerial rocket artillery. They actually caught 2 rockets. Young ladies. It was funny. Dan, who was a MP, was really upset about the picture that MP's given the driver a light. But you would be driving along, and they had helicopters that would just fly along the route. This was a plane that has not stopped where it needed to. There's the engineer telling the major that, no, sir, we cannot move the plane that way. You know, just the, what do? Have a smoke. You know, that was, it's the way you get out of the plane, or the chopper sometimes, you jump out. Yeah, see, there's the stink eye. Remember that. And when you're in the jungle, that guy's about 3 feet away from me, and all you can see is his face. The other thing you do when you get a break is sleep. Now here's the that mountain yard village that I talked about. And this is the mountain yard. Why? He's one of them. He works for the government, but he's trying to get them to turn over the. Oh, there he is, getting it in the butt. This guy they got him to turn him over. They weren't being really friendly with him. Taking a bath. This is one of those times when they landed a mortar on the top of Hong Kong Mountain, and where we had all of our aerial antennas and things, and you guys were up there fixing it all. This is just, into an LZ. That's when something goes bang real close and you go, oh. Dig a hole. Heat injuries. Trying not to scare the people. These are just prisoners they've picked up, and obviously not happy. That's the one that's on the front, but I cleaned it up. These are training stuff that they did on the big LZs. That's just coming in for a landing. This is elephant grass. And when it gets real tall, you can have a guy a foot away from you, you can't see him. Whistle. They make noise. This is a firefight. was with a little squad patrol, and the lead man got hit, and next thing we knew, we were shooting all over the place trying to figure out what was going on. This was not the guy that we carried out. This was he was sitting on the edge of his foxhole on the mound of dirt, and a 105 long round landed in the hole, and it took off all the skin on his back, and they had to medevac him out, and that's where the chopper was coming in. Ah, yes. The division commander. Now, almost every person that I photographed in this ceremony, and if you can, even while there's a service going on, they're checking out the perimeter. Almost every one of those men was not, was either killed or wounded. Because when I went back to that unit, they said, no, you can't go out with this, you're bad juju.